And OBS is check, check, 1, 2. Yeah, we're in the. All right, let's see what we got here. Mr. Rovita, can you hear me on the interwebs? I am on the interwebs. This is our shot of the screen. That's Francisco walking in front of it. Yeah, I can give you more if you want, but I'm also barely talking into the mic right now. I mean, if I'm actually speaking into the mic, is this any better? Yeah, no, I purposely was keeping it low so we would get the low end, and I know when I have, you know what I mean? No, absolutely. But now, if I'm actually speaking into the microphone, and if the person is not speaking into the microphone, I can give them a little bit more. I have room to go. You guys are good. Don't worry.
Yeah, we'll have space to put the laptop.
Cheerleaders.
Okay, good evening and welcome. So nice to see you all tonight. We're really excited to have this session and to share the information on behalf of the district and board. And as we get started tonight, I just want to make note that we do have a bulk of the board members are with us tonight because this is one of our engagement sessions. Those of you who were with us in the 2017-2018 school year know we did several sessions like this. And part of one of the biggest reasons for having these sessions, A, is to inform you as community residents, but B, to also give the board an opportunity to hear your feedback and questions as they contemplate all the different opportunities and plans that are before them. So board members are sitting predominantly up towards the front here. So they are here for listening. They're really not here to be necessarily fielding questions at this point in time. Our board meetings are all providing some time for discussion on this topic, so always welcome to come and join in those or to send emails, as folks always do. Also tonight with us is Walter Hauser from KG&D, here to help field any questions on the building design construction front as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to dive in because we do have quite an extensive presentation tonight. I do see some familiar faces in the audience already, so some of this may be a little bit of repeat for some of you. But what I hope that you see through this is meant to be an iterative process, meaning we got to start somewhere. We start with some ideas, we come out to the community, we hear feedback, we go back and we tweak, we come back out, and we do that several times to help make sure that we're doing the best job of listening to the community and meeting both the internal educational program needs of the educators and students and parents within the building as well as the neighborhood. So our capital improvement bond, tonight we are going to be talking about really the main buckets of what is being contemplated by the board. And just by way of background for anyone who's new to this conversation, the board has been looking at facilities actually not just for this year, but for a couple of years. The board members who were here last year as one of their board goals had set a goal to look at finance and facilities, to take a deep dive into understanding the conditions of our facilities as well as our short and long-term financial situation so that they could make educated choices and decisions on behalf of the district. That led us to the point where we were ready and it was on schedule to do a building conditions survey. Generally, it's done every 5 years in a school district. The state changed their cycle, so it's actually been 9 years since our last one. But what districts do is they use that as a 5-year capital planning guide. So that's what we did. We did the building conditions survey, as well as an updated enrollment report and demographic study and building utilization report to get a real sense of how are our facilities, what is our forecast for enrollment patterns, and then what do the utilization of our buildings currently look like to help inform and determine what our needs are. So through that, identified infrastructure concerns, mostly due to the age of the schools. They're well cared for, well taken care of, but we're talking predominantly about the buildings that are about 100 years old. There's a little bit of work identified for the middle school as well, which is a newer building, but predominantly our focus is going to be on the 4 older buildings. What they really, what we came away with from those documents is that our older schools were not designed for the modern instructional program, which we'll talk more about throughout the presentation tonight. As a result, our space doesn't adequately address all of the learning needs and the learning approaches that we use in the 21st century, now that we're a quarter of a century in. Also, our space doesn't currently accommodate our current enrollment and projected enrollment. When I came to the district in 2017, we were having similar discussions. We're at about 3,000 students in the district. We've dropped down closer to 2,800, but the demographics show that we're heading back towards that number. And that's based on live birth rates and based on known development projects, as well as the existing students and patterns within the school. Also, in looking at the financial landscape of the district, we have some opportunities coming up that could create chances for us to address capital needs, in some cases without having to add to the tax burden. So we'll talk about that some as well. And from the district perspective and the board perspective, our schools are our assets. They're our biggest community property and biggest community asset, so they must be maintained for generations to come. So the key findings when we looked at infrastructure is, again, the schools are well maintained. Most of those repairs and upgrades needed relate to the age of the buildings. There's heating systems, exterior, what we call the building envelope, everything on the outside. So the roof, the windows, the masonry, everything on the outside that keeps water out were identified areas around predominantly the 4 schools. Certainly Siwanoy is our last building that is not ADA accessible, so that's a priority of the board. We have a lack of cafeteria space at this facility. We're sitting in the biggest part of the cafeteria is Cafeteria C, and we have B and A up there that all of our middle school students are able to fit in here during the school day, but that leaves at most about 50 seats, I think, in some periods, not every period, for high school students. So we have nowhere for high school students to eat unless they leave campus. Creative scheduling, no thanks to, we've got our building principals here tonight, so Ms. Sabia, Mr. Llewellyn. Through some creative scheduling, they were able to schedule most of our 9th graders to eat 7th period lunch this year. So we do have space for them because of the scheduling solution. But really for schools, you ideally would want cafeterias that would seat your entire student body, even with having an open enrollment policy. Our elementary schools, those of you who have children at Colonial, Siwanoy, and Prospect Hill, you know that we don't have cafeterias there either. They were built 100 years ago when the kids went home for lunch. So that we make it work with our gymnasiums, but those facility constraints have direct implications on the operations of the building, scheduling of staff, and programs. So if we're looking at a certain set of problems with the building, it makes sense to also look at how do we rectify those challenges and provide the opportunities for our students to loosen up some of those constraints. Air quality and conditioning should be considered, certainly after the pandemic and in a changing climate. I think that's something that's at the forefront of all of our minds as something that it's time to really start wrapping our hands around there. And sustainability options for heating and cooling. That's also been a priority of our board, is to look at, are there sustainable practices and systems that we could be looking at to do better long-term from a sustainability perspective, but also that would be more energy and cost efficient. Just some of the samples of what we're talking about. On the right, farthest over, you've got this building here. You see some major cracking. As long as you have masonry buildings, you're going to have masonry work to do pretty much all the time. So that's just one illustration of some of the repair work that needs to be done. Here you've got the middle school roof. That's coming. The building was 25 years old. Roof's coming to the point where it needs to be replaced. And here we have, this is probably one of the worst, but this is the reality of, this is one of the boilers here in the high school that is no longer functional. So we're not functioning on a full set of heating boilers. And that's representative of the situation that you'll see around the district. We will be doing walkthroughs of Siwanoy in particular, being that that's one of the biggest projects. So if you're interested, on Thursday night, we're doing our info session there. You can do a walkthrough with us at 6:30 before the info session at 7. Key findings from our enrollment study. Again, I've already talked about the growth that we're anticipating. The schools are operating at and above optimal functional capacity. We knew that back in 2017, which is why we added the equivalent of, it turned out to be 5 rooms when all was said and done to the high school to help to ease that, but it was by no means enough. We're very limited on space. That's kind of a recurring theme in our whole community. So we're once again looking at how can we use this opportunity to expand and provide more classrooms, especially on this campus, because when rooms are overused, it ties up your master schedule, it ties up your staffing, it has a wear and tear effect on the building, and you'll even see some instructional impacts that can come from that as we go through. Elementary schools are also, the classrooms there tend to be undersized, and at this building as well, undersized for current standards. We do great with them. One of the things I think that we're our own worst enemy, because we never want parents to feel like their child's not getting the best education, so we make it work. Our teachers are great at making it work, our principals are great at making it work, but the reality is that most of our classrooms in the older buildings are undersized. An additional thing that we have very much struggled with is sufficient small group instruction space. So special education programs, intervention programs, ENL instruction happen in spaces that were not thought of 100 years ago. So those spaces were not built. So when I say we have converted storage rooms and closets and subdivided rooms, I kid you, like that, every single building we've made use of every single square foot of space to provide those small group instruction spaces for our students and staff, but it really is not designed with the instructional goals in mind. So it's an opportunity for us to think about how do we provide the space to truly support the delivery of the program that we want for our students. Special education, not just in Pelham, but everywhere, is growing post-pandemic. So we want to be able to intentionally and thoughtfully provide spaces for our special education programs in a sustainable way. Our goal has always been to give students the least restrictive environment and keep as many in district as possible. So we're looking at potential opportunities to explore that with these building projects. And then finally, one key point, and any of you who are Siwanoy parents, you may know this from your own child's experience. You may not know it, you probably felt it, but you may not have had the hard data. We have the hard data now that shows us that Siwanoy has the lowest square footage per student building in the district, which is really important to know. Yeah, beautiful building, absolutely love it, but it has the smallest square footage. This is just a quick snapshot of those enrollment projected growth. So currently at the elementary, we've got 1,284. So by the year 2029, so only 4 short years away, we're going to peak almost 100 students higher than that across the elementaries, which means we're going to likely have bigger class sizes because we don't have any additional classroom spaces to put kids in. So we're going to see some growth across the schools. Middle school, we're currently at 765 going up to 784, so it's about 20. It's not huge. Our middle school tends to really kind of fluctuate anywhere between 9, 10, or 11 sections across a grade level every year. But then the high school, we're expecting to see about an 80, almost 100 student increase as well. By 2020, those are 32 and 33. So we've got a little bit more time before those peaks hit the secondary campus. But again, we're already functioning at an over capacity. So in order to continue to offer the programs, the classes in the master schedule where students can best get them, we need to loosen up some of the constraints of space that keep us somewhat limited at this point in time. So in approaching this whole conversation, the priorities of the district and board have been and will continue to be developing a long-term capital improvement plan. That's part of what we're talking about tonight. Prioritizing the projects to really look at where is the greatest need and the highest leverage point. So, of course, we all want to continually support our high-quality educational program, and inspiring a standard of excellence for all students continues to remain our North Star. We want to provide healthy and safe learning environments for students and staff, and that encompasses a lot of different factors. And then, as we said earlier, we want to invest in preserving the community's assets for generations to come. So also going with what I said earlier, looking for ways to do that in an environmentally friendly way. And also, and we'll talk about this much later in the presentation, how can we do that in a way that aligns with some upcoming drops in funding, which give us opportunities to do some borrowing without having to increase taxes. So how do we kind of fit into that, stage our work out? I already started to allude to some of this, but just again, the board started really last year looking at facilities and finance needs, which led them to this spring, that keyhold write-in with strategic planning. As we had a broad stakeholder group, it was the entire board at that time, and faculty and staff and students from the high school coming together to set out what does the next 5 years look for us. And one of the 3 priority areas that came out of that, it came out of our surveys, it came out of focus groups, so then it found its way to, as a main priority in that plan, is facilities and sustainable learning environments. So that, again, helped to prioritize our work for today. So this fall, as I've talked about, we did the deep dive through those different reports. KG&D came and presented the building conditions survey to the board back in September. Capital Markets Advisors came to our October meeting to talk about what is our debt service schedule going forward, what opportunities for borrowing do we have. I've been to all the PTAs across the schools over the last couple of months, starting to make another round to those, certainly having these sessions. We've got 3 sessions this week. So trying to really get the word out that we're looking deeply and thinking deeply about these things so that we can start to figure out how do we solve for these issues and provide our students the opportunities, the settings for the learning environment that we want. So right now we're in that yellow phase, which is the feedback phase. And as I said earlier, we have to start somewhere, which is why we had the architects come back on January 8th. Was our first that was the first presentation of these. So to give us a starting point, as one of my colleagues said, we needed something that was good enough to criticize. And that's what we're doing here. So that's part of our process, is coming together to hear your voice, hear the feedback. I'll be meeting with the faculty, Walter and I will be meeting with the faculty at Siwanoy later this week. In addition, so that we hear the voice of the educators as well. They're the ones who make it work every day, the boots on the ground, who know how best to educate our kids, what the barriers are that are caused by our facilities, and how we might improve those for them. And then from here, tentatively right now, we're hoping to get enough feedback and to really be able to unify folks around a decision potentially by the end of March. We do it that soon in order to try to make all the regulatory milestones to put it on a May vote. So there's a lot of conversations yet to happen, but that's our goal timeline. And then if we're able to meet that timeline, there will be a vote in May, right along with the budget. And then work would likely begin not that summer, but the following summer, because that's when real design work starts, and that's when the process starts. So there would not be anything for at least a year following that. And as I said earlier, we've got some borrowing opportunities that as we stage out the projects, we want to also try to align the borrowing for those projects to help most mitigate the tax impact on the community. So I already gone through these. It was just some of the dates that we had been around doing some different events this fall. So to get into the nuts and bolts, with the heating systems across the 4 older schools, it was recommended that we replace and upgrade our heating systems. We currently have steam heat, which is pretty antiquated at this point, not as efficient as current systems. So they're all at end of life, as I said, inefficient, and certainly costly should you get repair or failure. Unfortunately, we all experienced a little failure here at the middle school, different systems, but it was an example of something that we need to bring these projects forward and approve projects because we need a lot of lead time given the amount of time it takes to bring certain things like this to a vote and then design and then give it to state education department, which generally takes 8 months up to a year for approvals. So it's usually a very long time runway to get to repairs. So that very unit that burst back in December is scheduled to be replaced this summer. We already have the voter approval. We just this fall got the state ed approval, but that's what happens when we wait a little bit too long on critical systems. So all of our heating systems in the older buildings are at that stage. The recommendation is to look at upgrading those to hot water systems, which are more efficient, to also replace what is in most cases some of the original piping so that we've got new systems, new pipes to carry that throughout. That would also give us the ability to consider other upgrades to systems. As I talked about earlier, we've got water intrusion issues that we want to address. Slate roof at Prospect Hill is the original roof, so it's about 100 years old. It's served its time, and we're seeing some repairs that need to be made there. So a replacement of that roof, some additional repairs, Colonial and Middle School in identified areas, and then masonry and windows, again, at the older schools. So the overall infrastructure costs, as they have been laid out now, total about $54 million, and that's across the 4 buildings. I know it's kind of small, but you can see across each. You got the roofing categories, windows, masonry, heat plant replacement. So that's replacing in kind. Upgrading is an additive cost. So upgrading to hydronic heat would add that column's worth of cost there to give you the subtotals for each of the specific schools. So Colonial is proposed for just for infrastructure, just over $7 million. Siwanoy in its current state, and we've got other projects to talk about with Siwanoy, but just looking at the current facility, that would be just over $8 million in infrastructure repairs. Prospect Hill, $11.7 million. The middle school, $2.7, which again is predominantly your some repointing and roofing are the big costs there. And the high school, about $24.5 million in infrastructure repairs. So let's talk a little about Siwanoy specifically. It's opened in 1910. Gorgeous building. I know it's just a blog post recently with some of the history of Siwanoy, some really fantastic pictures. It is a gorgeous building, and I think from the outside, it doesn't really tell you the story of the inside of the building. And again, we don't complain about these things because we want parents to feel comfortable with their children and the education they're getting. But the reality is that is the building in most significant need. It was not designed for the current modern instructional program. It has insufficient classrooms for current and future enrollment. Right now, any of your Siwanoy parents this year, we're very tight. We had to do away with the makerspace because we need it for a classroom. Every square inch of that building is used. Part of that was because we were intentional this year about trying to keep kindergarten and first grade smaller. In the post-pandemic world, we want to do that so the kids get the strongest foundation. But by doing that, we created a space problem. So, and we're really at our limits there. So we could use more classrooms in that building to really be able to spread out and keep the class sizes small, also to deal with future enrollments. It has that lack of small group instructional space. I know Ms. Weaver, who's doing a parent education session tomorrow night on growth mindset. That's an advertisement. commercial, you can come over to Siwanoy at 6:30 tomorrow, and you can hear a great session from her. Her office is basically a closet, but she makes the best of it, and that's one of the many examples of things that we've made to work there. The kindergarten classes, many of you may know this, they're in the basement in rooms that were not designed to be classrooms. They were designed to be storage rooms 100 years ago, but we've repurposed every space in that building. One of them's got a pole right in the middle of the classroom, and both of them are about 2/3 of the size of modern standard for kindergarten classrooms. Kindergarten classrooms are some of the biggest instructional. They should be because of the amount of movement and space that children need, and we don't have that. So they do a great job, but those classrooms are really, can inhibit the instructional process for teachers and the movement ability for students. And as I already said, we've got the lowest square footage per student in the district. I should add in there, we didn't put it on there, and maybe we'll get to it afterwards. It also doesn't, it's like our other older buildings with only, no cafeteria, only a gymnasium that serves as a gymnasium, a lunchroom, a large groups meeting space, parent events, anything that happens that needs a large space in that room has to happen in the cafeteria. So that's a lot of wear and tear, but also limits a lot of opportunities for programs to use the space. From the accessibility perspective, as I said, it's our only school that is still not ADA compliant, and that's really important to the board and the district that we address that at this time. So students with disabilities and members of the public obviously then can't get to the school. I think there's 7 different levels in that building, and there's stairs to every one of them. We actually counted, there's 28 stairs to the front door. So it is a very inaccessible building in many, many ways. And the layout of the building is problematic in adding an elevator. The layout of it is really prohibitive. In order to do it in spaces that will gain access to all levels, you wind up losing classroom space. So if we're going to take out classrooms to put in elevators, we have to then restore classrooms because we're full at capacity and expected to grow. That's kind of the connect the dots of the logic there. And when we look at the building design, we can point some of that out. So what we're going to show you are drafts. I want to underscore that. They are drafts. They are not decided on, but they're ones that we're here tonight to get feedback on. So each of the options, these are kind of some of the non-negotiables. Each of them would address ADA accessibility, would include a net gain in classrooms, to make up for the installation of the elevator space, and would increase small group instruction space by renovating some of the older space and or adding some into the new space. Included within that is the addition of some additional special education space. We currently have 1 special education program in the building. The younger students in that program attend Colonial for their first 3 to 4 years, then transition to Siwanoy. We'd love to be able to have those students and families be able to be in one school for their entire K-5 educational experience. So we've asked to consider extra space in this model for that. These would also include renovation of the existing building. One of the biggest things that we heard at the listening sessions was about outdoor space, green space, play space, whichever term you want to use for it. So within there you will see that we have made it non-negotiable to preserve the outdoor classroom, the microforest. That have been efforts by the parents in that community, in the Siwanoy community specifically. All of these also, our goal is to incorporate stormwater and runoff flooding improvements in really 2 ways. We're already in conversations with Pelham Manor about their ongoing stormwater projects and how we might be able to partner with that, as some of that infrastructure actually runs under the Siwanoy campus. So we're going to be continuing those conversations as we plan, as well as we've asked our architects to bring on a landscape architect that thinks about sustainability, knowing the efforts that have gone on in the school and the importance to the Siwanoy community and the community as a whole to bring in more sustainable approaches to dealing with landscape. And we are one of the biggest landholders. We are the biggest landholder, I think, in the community. So we want to be responsible there. So we're bringing on a consultant to help with those efforts. And so the plans you're going to see tonight have taken into a lot of the initial feedback, but we're going to be taking in more. So again, these are drafts, and I'll just orient you real quickly. And Walt will help me out if I get stuck on anything, but I think I've got the basics here. This is the current school. So the yellow was in blue were just, excuse me, I take that back. The yellow is the current school. It was added just for visibility so you can see it. Currently, this is mostly your asphalt over here, and like the new playground is over here, picnic areas down here. So what this is proposing, this is option B. We've gone through a series of options already. A, B, B alternate, C, C alternate, and D? Yes. Yes, we don't have all of them tonight because some of them we've decided not to explore too much further, but we're going to give you kind of the core ones of what we're looking at. So this is the current building. Option B would maintain the current building as is. It would add this expansion in blue, which would then have additional classroom space, bathrooms, cafeteria, and some of the small group space that we talked about. And I'll show you the inside footprint shortly. This would maintain your outdoor classroom over here, would maintain your microforest up here, add some kind of outdoor learning space, soft space to add a new element to the outside area. One of the thoughts we had was adding a kindergarten playground, because you'll see inside those are kindergarten classrooms, and it gives the opportunity to go straight, teacher to take the students straight from the classroom out to playground. Restore it, moving the current play structure over so it is maintained, just shifted, keeping the play space, reorienting some of the play space in the middle, keeping the current smaller play space, and then trying to restore some sort of picnic area up here because we would lose the picnic area back there. There is a small service drive here. Originally that was a parking lot, and we got incredible consistent feedback that that was not a desire of the community, so we've taken that out. This is a service road simply to get into the cafeteria. Food deliveries, access to get those in, take trash out, et cetera. So those are things, again, this is draft, so that's kind of the design of where we are right now. The other thing I will point out, again, with the sustainability in mind, it's a ton of asphalt back there. It is impervious, which is contributing to the stormwater runoff. So we've already talked about that being replaced with pervious surface to try to remediate stormwater through that as one simple solution for us to be looking at. When you get into the building, this is the current footprint. So the bright purple is renovation. So this model would provide renovation of all of the interior space. Over there's your library, classrooms, toilet rooms. This is the one and only student toilet room in the only building. I think there's one on each floor, maybe. Very limited bathroom space in this building as well. You would see an installation of a chair lift in this area. It's the stairs on that side. This is your main office to orient you as a front entrance. Offices either side, classrooms, et cetera. And then on this side is where an elevator would be added to then give you access to all of the existing floors as well as the new wing. We'd lose some classroom space here, which would then be reduced to a special education room, so we'd repurpose it for small group instruction. And again, some of this may change, but just as initial thoughts and ideas. Gymnasium would remain as is, and then an expansion would be here, heading out towards that back corner. So within that would be potentially three kindergarten rooms, full-size rooms on the ground floor with boys and girls bathrooms attached right to the classroom, which is modern standard. Cafeteria across it with a small pantry. And the nice thing about that is the students can go right from the cafeteria straight out onto the playground and into the green space. And again, this is the back of the building where that service road would be. This is the upper floor, really same thing. We're just renovating those current classrooms. This is a gymnasium. Second floor of this expansion could have three potentially fifth grade classrooms with small group instruction spaces added as well. I know I'm going to put you on the spot, Walter, so I'm sorry, warning you about this. One of the questions that has come up several times is, could we build on top of the cafeteria to get additional classroom space? Is there anything you can share with us about thoughts on that?
So the short answer is, of course, we can build on the cafeteria, and there may be an option to consider future expansion on the cafeteria. The only trick there is we need to know in advance so that we can prepare the steel and the structure to support a potential expansion in the future. Or we could explore options now to maybe manipulate the footprint to include second story space there.
Thank you. All right. So that's something for the board to consider as well. On the basement level, this is the current basement. So again, a lot of renovations throughout. Here, what we would likely do, one of the thoughts was currently our nurse's office is here. Music is over here. I think that's the one that used to be the bike room, like a bike storage room. There's our music room. And our art room is all the way down here. And there's a giant pillar in the middle of that room. So one thought was do some shifting, move the nurse across into the bigger space, bring music across to even bigger space into what's currently one of our kindergarten rooms, and then move art up to the other current kindergarten rooms. So in both cases, they'd be moving to a larger footprint space. Nurse, music, and art would move to larger space, renovate the rest, create an OT and PT, that's occupational therapy, physical therapy room, office, and then maybe turn this, what's currently the art room, into a maker space or storage for maker materials for when they bring them up into the classroom. So just some thoughts that are going on right now. And then we've got some innards, some boiler room, storage, carpentry shop that would remain. So that's option B. We were asked, is there anything smaller than that? So we have a B alternate, which is everything that I just said except without the cafeteria. That is an option. Option C, very different proposition here. This is certainly more of a major change. In yellow, you see the current building, but what this proposes is taking the wings off the sides and then building a brand new, bigger expansion over here. So you're getting more of a new building in this model while retaining the center original core of the building. Outdoors, basically some of your same elements, the microforest, the outdoor classroom, potentially kindergarten, playground, picnic area, the play space. In this model, since that wing would be coming down, that would be an opportunity to open up a whole new area of outdoor play space for students that could be designed specifically for that purpose. So with this one, and I should have mentioned it with the other, with option B, that was an overall net gain of 2 classrooms. So let me just go back just so you can envision that for a second. So on this, you remember there was 3 fifth grade rooms and 3 kindergarten rooms. We would lose 4 classrooms to add in the accessibility elements, but we would gain back 6 classrooms for a net gain of 2. Sorry, for a net gain of 2. Lose 4, gain 6, net gain of 2. So going to option C, this would be a net gain of 4 classrooms with this current proposal. So again, eliminating the wings. This one would add a new gymnasium, since we got rid of the old wing with the current gymnasium. A new gym, new cafeteria, the net gain of 4 classrooms in this case, and would leverage savings on infrastructure improvements inside, since there's less renovation to be done. So when you go inside, you can see it. Again, the main core remains the same. You've added a gym back here, a cafeteria here, a library up front, and then you've got your kindergarten rooms here, toilet rooms, kitchen, etc. One nice thing about this is it is fully accessible through the one elevator that gains you access to all levels. It also provides an opportunity to build a new entry, which would be an accessible, an ADA accessible and secure entry between the old and the new parts of the building. Second floor looks very similar. You got your second floor of the gym, additional classroom space up here. Your 812 special education classrooms, those were on the other model as well. I just neglected to point them out. And all of your basic program space, same as you would have had in option B, but with 2 additional classrooms. And this is basement level, so same kind of thing. Moving the nurse into larger space, art and music into larger spaces, and renovating the entire remainder. So one alternate to that as well was, what if we put the gym in the front? The thought behind that was the elevation of the property. It's high in the back on the playground, and it slopes down towards the front, which does exacerbate your flooding issues. But is there a way that we could take the biggest element, the gymnasium, put it on the front and help to reduce the profile relative to the neighborhood? So that was one thinking about putting it up front. The challenge there is, in order to avoid destroying the carriage path that runs the front of the building, you'd have to offset it a little bit closer to the fence line. So a little bit closer to the front, closer to the fence line, which I think aesthetically presents some challenges. But it's possible. So there's a cost when we look at all of those 4 that are kind of the ones on the table at this point in time. Option B, the very first one we looked at, $29.9 million. B minus without the cafeteria goes to $28.250 million. Option C, and originally we did think there was some cost savings there. As we refine costs, which is what we do in this process as well, it was not as much as we had originally hoped. So that is, option C is at 39.95, so just short of 40 million. And option C1 with the gymnasium at the front is just over 40 million. So one thing I will add at this point too, we are bringing on a construction manager to do cost estimation checking. We think it's important to have that cross-check as we get through this process, because the last thing we want to do is get through this process and have a budget that doesn't actually build what we promised we were going to build. So they are going to be starting their work with us probably within the next week or so. So at our upcoming board meetings, we'll be getting updates on those from the cost estimator to cross-check. So moving on to the high school, the building that we're in now, middle school and high school really are impacted because these two campuses are so intertwined. So as I said earlier, both of them are overutilized, which means most classrooms are used every period of the day or almost every period of the day. So what that does, not to get too in the weeds, but when you're building a master schedule, you want to put classes, you want to schedule the classes when students can best get them. And what happens now is we have to schedule classes when the room is available, which can limit things, and sometimes often we can't put classes where we want them to be. One of the biggest challenges that I see as well is you've got teachers who have to go, they share multiple rooms. I don't know how high it goes, and I'm looking at my building principals. When I was principal, I tried to have people in no more than 2 rooms, but that's not even close to reality here. 3 is pretty much standard. So that means teachers are going to the room, teaching their class, picking up all their stuff, going to the next class, putting it all down, teaching the class, picking it all up, going to a third classroom. So there's no ownership of the classroom, but what that does have an impact on, really even more so, is their setup and preparation, because they're walking in the room with the kids, and they need that time to get themselves settled and set up. And then the other thing it does, and this is a small thing, but it's a powerful thing, if you've ever been to school where all the teachers are at the door to greet children when they walk in, that sets such a great culture and tone. Because of our facilities use, we can't do that. I mean, some people could, but for the most part, teachers are just moving from point A to point B. So those little things that make school even more special, your facilities actually impact negatively. So those are some of the things, little things that we're seeing. But then it also means with teachers having to share rooms, they use one setup, and it's a very traditional setup. It takes away the opportunity for teachers to get creative with group work, with more flexible furnishings and different setups that would better foster student-driven communication, student-driven instruction, collaboration, communication, all those critical skills that we want our secondary students in particular to be developing as they're heading off towards college. So it takes away a lot of flexibility to deliver how we do our work with our students. And going to the science lab specifically, so in addition to all those same times, we don't have enough of them. So we've got science teachers sharing rooms. So when it comes to setting up for labs, they don't have the classroom available to set up the lab. So again, you're setting up as students are coming in. So there's a loss of instructional time. A little bit every day adds up over time. We even have a science teacher on a cart right now going from classroom to classroom, which again exacerbates that sort of issue. We have our physics teachers, I think in particular, are in regular classrooms that have been outfitted retroactively to be science rooms, but again, not outfitted for the type of science, especially with the next gen standards, the learning approaches that we want for those students, and in space that really is just inadequate in many cases. So, and I will add with that, our science programs, the district has been investing in STEM programming for the last 10 years, and we've seen incredible growth and incredible success. We're going to be honoring our 2 science talent search winners for this year. It's becoming an annual thing, which is incredibly crazy and great. We're investing heavily in there, and now we feel it's time to invest in the facilities to now match that. And then finally, I'll add with the one that I started with, not enough cafeteria space for high school students. So that is continuing to be a problem. But we're also trying to be forward thinking about that, because so many of our students are going on to college, and a large piece of our job is to prepare them for the collegiate environment. We thought, how can we build something here that's going to replicate that for students and give them a space that's a little bit more their own, where it's more like a student center. I think like a college student center. A commons is what you might see it called. Something that we keep joking, a little bit more serious than a cafeteria, but less serious than a library. Place they can go, they can collaborate, they can get a snack, they can work with friends, a teacher can bring a class down there, they can be collaborative and creative, and it'd be really a vibrant high school space for activities for students. And then it could even be a flex, community performing space, it could be a meeting space, there'd be a tremendous amount of uses that we as a community could make of that space. So we're looking at two primary options for the high school right now. There's, again, variations of these, everything from A to D1 and multiples along the way. So I'm just showing you a couple that seem to be honing in more on where our conversation is leading us. So the first is option B, which proposes a cafeteria over here. Right now it's labeled middle school cafeteria, but this is what we're talking about to be the high school commons. So like a student center with like a kitchen or pantry attached to it. Full food service would continue to come out of this cafeteria, but a smaller pantry there, so it would be more of a grab and go kind of opportunity for kids, maybe some kiosks, maybe a coffee shop, I don't know. That's all down the road. But that would be the first level in what is really this area right here. We call it the breezeway. It's the pass when you go out the doors up there and go outside across to the middle school gym. That's the breezeway. So that's exactly the space that we're talking about for this expansion. It would take away a little bit of Ingalls Field, but it would still be a usable space. It's currently predominantly used for Little League, recreation, recess, et cetera. So we don't do any varsity competition on that field, so it would still be fine for use. And then on the second floor of that, this is the smaller version. So this is 6 new science labs and 2 general purpose classrooms over 2 floors. So this is ground floor, we'll call it first floor. Second floor would have, this picture's got 4 labs, 4 labs plus a classroom. And then above that, you would see very similar, a couple more science labs and an extra classroom. That's our smallest version. Originally, we were talking about doing some renovation to bring district offices over to what we call the annex. That's the older connector building along Franklin that runs from the old high school to the newer middle school. As we've talked this through, I think the board came to consensus around, as much as they would love for us to be here, the students need the space more than we do, and I fully agree with them. So potentially some renovations of that just to update the classroom space. So an add over here, any add over there would be additive. So this smaller proposal adds basically six new science labs overall and 2 general purpose classrooms. So a net gain of 8 with 6 of them being new science labs. Option C, a little bit bigger. So it creates this new high school commons, again, down in the ground level with some collaboration space, a little bit more advanced thinking on what that student center would look like. This one could add as many as 10 new science labs on top, which would then actually open up other general purpose classrooms that are currently in use for science. So what the goal would be here would be your first floor cafeteria, second floor is science labs, and third floor would be science labs as well. And with this, there are some classrooms right now here, about 3 science classrooms that could be high school science classrooms that could be moved over into the new wing. So we could co-locate all science, high school science together in the new wing, which would then retroactively open up more classroom space over here to be turned back into regular other subjects of classroom space. Plus, we would maintain this. So this would be a major gain. This would be a gain of 10 classrooms. 10 new classrooms, plus regaining 3 classrooms over here. So it's a net gain, I think, of 13, if you think of it that way. One other piece that I will point out, you probably saw this little purple here and this little purple. We, district offices, since we moved out of this building back in after the 2018 bond, we're currently in rental space in the Sanborn Map building. We would love somehow to get back out of rental space and into district property. This could give us the opportunity to take what's currently a technology room behind the middle school office. Thankfully, Ms. Sabia and I get along really well, so we could work very closely together. We could repurpose that into part of the district offices, which could get part of us back on campus, and then we'd have to explore some additional space somewhere else on the campus to bring the remainder. There's a little spot here that could be an office space as well. So that's what that is. That's something that we're thinking about as well. But at this point, we're not continuing with the idea of taking classroom space in the annex away for purposes of district offices. So just looking at those 2 options, there's your range, $34.5 million for the smaller option B, which is the add of 8 classrooms. Option C, $44 million, which is the 10 labs plus opening back up 3 labs, 3 rooms that are already occupied with science. We've looked at options in between, looked at options smaller, options bigger. We seem to be centering kind of in this neighborhood, but we're continuing to take feedback and consider where to go there. It would be an additional $1.2 million to renovate that technology lab into office space. So we just wanted to note that as well. So getting towards the end of our needs here, air conditioning, something we've been thinking about for a long time. Now the governor has passed a law that as of September 1st, we cannot hold instruction in any classroom that's 88 degrees or hotter. So this will not fix that by September, but that is long-term something we're thinking, how do we solve this problem correctly? So for the time being, we're putting window units in the top floors of the elementaries and the high school by the fall. And that will hopefully get us through because those are the classrooms that do approach those levels of heat. But we're looking at how do we do this right long term. So central air conditioning to meet that obligation, provide cleaner, filtered air, promote health, and make it just an easier, better environment for learning for our students. And we're also at the same time exploring geothermal, because when we upgrade to hot water heat, which I mentioned back in the beginning, that gives us that pairs well with air conditioning. When you have heat and air conditioning on the same system, then you can consider geothermal as a viable investment. Higher upfront cost, but at the last board meeting, Walter shared with us the 50-year payback period. If I got it right, the first 25 years, maybe break even. It's the second 25 years where you really see significant cost savings. Was that close?
Pretty close. There's a net boost. You're doing a great job. There is a net boost available with incentive funding. So when we consider geothermal versus a traditional system, over 25 years, it's about the same. But with incentive funding that is currently available through the federal government, the payback comes down significantly, and it's about a 20% savings to install geothermal with the incentive.
Thank you. So we've been exploring those options, and I know KG&D is working with other districts who are exploring those options as well. So if we're looking predominantly with the opportunity to do those. We do have the space at Prospect Hill, Siwanoy, and here at the middle school, high school. Colonial, we did look into that. The space is not big enough for it to be substantial savings, and also it could limit future building on that property depending where the wells go. So we didn't want to do that because that was the whole point in purchasing the 314 Pelhamdale house several years ago to give us future building opportunities there. So it makes sense to look at it, especially paired with the bigger projects. And that's something actually we talked about in looking at it, prioritizing infrastructure. It makes sense to pair your air conditioning and window replacement for the energy savings that would come with them. So, sorry, formatting's a little bit off on this. It's my fault. Elementary air conditioning. Overall, if we just looked at the 3 elementary schools that are not air conditioning, that would be about $14.4 million. The high school specifically, and this cost has gone down a lot as we've refined, that's down to $15.5 million. There is a lot of this building that actually is already air conditioned through window units and other split units, because there's been different renovation projects over the years. Geothermal, if we considered all 3 of the schools that we're looking at, that's around $12 million, and I think the rebate, or the potential offset was about $9.5 million. So we could potentially see some savings there to offset that investment. Okay, so finally, I mentioned this earlier at the beginning, we do have some debt dropping off in the near future. I don't remember what the first drop off was related to, but the second one was related to the middle school being paid off. So in the 26-27 school year, this is our current debt service level. It's between $6 and $7 million. And in this year, it drops down to about $6 million. That gives us the opportunity to potentially borrow up to $10 million, thinking of 15-year amortization for renovations. And this is in consultation with our capital markets advisors. So there'll be an opportunity to borrow $10 million tax neutral. It would not add to the tax burden. And then we go out to the 2030-31 school year, a much bigger drop. This is where the middle school is paid off. That's down to, it looks like about $3.4 million. Would give us the opportunity to borrow $55 million debt neutral. So that's $65 million in borrowing power that would not add to the tax burden, which is why it seems like a good time for us to be thinking about this work, especially as we're thinking about all the infrastructure that needs to be done because of the age of our buildings, as well as trying to solve for some of these programmatic and space issues. for our schools. So as we've already mentioned, we've got upcoming info sessions. We are doing building tours on Thursday. You come at 6:30. You can do a building tour of Siwanoy. We just today added a couple more dates for building tours because we found a lot of people haven't been in Siwanoy in a really long time. And again, we don't complain about it, but we want you to see what we're talking about because seeing is believing. So we'll be pushing that information out through Parent Square. If you have not signed, if you don't have kids in the school and you're not on our email distribution list, please, on these music stands on the way in and out, there's info sheets you're welcome to take, but there's also a postcard with a QR code for you to sign up and get on our distribution list because we want to stay in communication with everyone to the greatest degree possible through this process. Also, if you're an immediate neighbor on Manor Place or Siwanoy Place, we've also assembled a hard mailing list. So as we have different events and different progress through the project, we'll be hard mailing those neighbors. We found that very helpful last time because we want to stay in close touch with those most impacted by these projects from the neighborhood perspective. So that is the overview. And with that, we've got a little over half an hour. I think we were aiming to be here till about 8:30 at the latest to open it up for questions. Since we're a relatively small enough group, we were going to do index cards and all that, but I don't think we need to do that. I think we've got a good enough group. So yeah, I will just call in folks. If you wouldn't mind coming to the mic only because we are live streaming and recording. So in order for us to capture on that, we do need you to speak into the mic. So.
Hi, I'm Ann Keenan. I live on Manor Lane. And my 3 daughters, went to Siwanoy quite a while ago. But just wanted to know that, I've done design with New York City, and I was wondering if option B for Siwanoy could consider a second floor over the cafeteria. Instead of being a +2, it'd be +5 then. And it seems to, I think, probably money-wise, probably make a lot of sense.
So I think the answer to that question is yes, that can be considered.
Yeah, and so, yeah, the cost basis should be offered to us, and, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, yes.
Hi, I'm Hannah Resnick. I have 2 daughters who went through Siwanoy as well, and I live on Siwanoy Place. I'm actually kind of surprised that we're still talking about maybe building on top of the cafeteria and still talking about potentially knocking down the wings, because the last meeting I was at, there was a lot of people who spoke out against this, about wanting to preserve the current building and also preserve the feel of the neighborhood and not build so much on it. And now we're talking about maybe putting a gym in front. I mean, it just seems like it's just getting worse. Who's going to ultimately decide which of these options is going for vote? Because considering that option A was taken off the table without any input from the community, I'm just wondering, is it just going to be randomly selected and we have no say in which option is chosen?
No, the Board of Education is going to be who ultimately makes the decision.
So the community is not going to have any say into what?
That's actually part of these sessions, and what I would say is there haven't been a ton of revisions since these were presented to the board on the 28th. So especially the exterior, the outdoor space, that a lot of the feedback that we heard that night, we passed on to the architects, and they've taken that into consideration here. So this is the next stage. We've got these sessions this week we'll call this the focus group sessions, where we're going to continue, the board's going to be at as many of those as possible to hear from the community. That was a small group. This is certainly a larger group. We're hoping to engage with as many people as possible. And additionally, after we do this education week, we're also going to be sending out a community-wide survey to get more data from the community. And all of that is going to be provided to the board, and then they're going to debate that and talk about it at the public meetings as they lead up to a decision.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, good evening. Chris D'Angelo. I live on Manor Lane, right across from the playground there. I'm just curious. I was at the Siwanoy session a couple weeks ago. I'm here tonight. I'm wondering if you've got the dimensions on that addition that would just add to the wing, and also the dimensions on knocking down the 2 wings and adding that one much larger structure, it seems.
Yeah, that's a good
If you've
question.
got dimensions on that, both in terms of height, feet, width, as well as extra square footage.
We don't have the dimensions today, but we can bring that to the next meeting for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it would be helpful
Yeah.
because I told you when Will was kind enough to talk to me over the weekend, it's hard to get a sense of exactly what this is going to look like in that space and how much of an impact it's going to have on the community that lives in that area just based on these drawings. You know, so size and scale, I think, are very, very important, as well as the architecture. And I'm also not in favor of that little driveway either, because that's right across from my house, but that's me. Thank you.
And thank you for that. I know one of the board members asked a similar question the other night about square footage of the play space and the green space too, just to get that sense of scale.
Well, yeah, and just how much more square footage are you going to be adding with each of those options?
Yep. Yep, we'll definitely get that information. Yep. And one of the things that we talked about too at the last board meeting was where we are. I didn't put the slide in the presentation, but where we are in design, we do a super minimal, and this is just the way that public education construction works, is you do conceptual design and conceptual budgets only. Then you go to the vote, then you do the actual design. And that's where a lot more of the detail that folks want comes into play. But we did hear loud and clear from those meetings that the architecture of the building was critically important. Folks did not want to see a departure from what they're looking at now. And so we've passed that on as well. So that and again, we don't generally get to that level of design yet, but that message was received loud and clear.
Hi, I'm Don Gammon. I live on Siwanoy Place, right across from the elementary school. 2 girls who attended elementary school at Siwanoy. I have 2 questions. Student enrollment projections. Who conducted those?
That was Eastern Suffolk BOCES. They're one of the main demographers that school districts use in the state.
Are those available for?
Yes.
We can see them before
Yes.
the vote.
Yes, absolutely. They're a little tricky to find, but I can tell you, if you go onto the website, if you go to our, and actually we'll load them into the Word on the bond site. Thank you. They're in 2 different places. So we've just launched a new bond webpage, and they're available there.
We being the district?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Second question is the bond. Did I understand the slides correctly that first you're going to vote on the bond, we're going to vote on the bond, and then we're going to vote on, or then it will be decided what plan?
No. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that because I think some folks came away from our session last week with a little misunderstanding around that.
Right.
So yeah, we're here right now. We're getting feedback. What happens here is that the bond scope, the board decides based on the feedback, based on the work with the architect, based on all their study, what design, which approach they want. Do they want option B? Do they want option C? Do they want something in between? Is there something still yet to be decided? They go through and they make a decision about what's included. They vote as a board about what to put to the voters. So it will not be both option B or C. They'll have to make a decision by then.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Champ. Susan Quinton. I have children at Colonial. And I know your to-do list is very, very long, but I'm wondering, was there any discussion during this round about the building next to Colonial potentially making, a cafeteria, some extra room space, making green space for Colonial, which has 0? Any thought, how does that rank in the list of things to do?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We did have all of those conversations. So we, I think the January 8th, no, October. Yes, and then it was the November if you go back to the November board presentation, you can see what was proposed. We did look at doing an expansion of the building that would go out towards the house. It included a cafeteria and I think 6 classrooms, 3 on the ground floor, 3 on the top floor. So a 2-floor expansion. The house would have to be demolished, but then you could expand the play space in front of it. So we did look at that. If I remember correctly, it was about a $19 million expansion. Ultimately, in viewing all the needs of the district, Siwanoy rose as more in need right now of attention as far as the overall, especially with the ADA access, because Colonial does have that. That work was done, I think it was back in 2010.
Yeah.
So that, and given the current size, we think, even though it's tight, I know it's tight, that we can manage that in the near future based on the enrollments that were projected. And I know that I think of Natalie because she said it many times on our facilities committee. We know that Colonial needs to be addressed. Right now, Siwanoy rose really as the more priority building.
So as we think forward, so we did Hutch and now we're doing this round, what's the next year that we're looking at?
I don't have
I mean,
that.
will my kids still be in elementary school? Probably
yeah.
not. Okay.
Probably not if they're
Thank
now.
you.
No. And I will say that is, the district kind of does have if you look back over the last several years, a tradition of focusing on a building for a major work. So the middle school was built because there was no middle school originally. And then after that, I believe Colonial, the initial expansion was done at Colonial and the ADA work. Then Hutchinson had its turn. Now Siwanoy's got its turn. I know Prospects had a little bit, and I know Prospect is looking, for some of the same questions. The classrooms there are bigger than most of the other buildings, so I would say the next one in need is definitely going, in my opinion, is Colonial, but that's something we can't commit to now. The current board can't commit to something that far down the road, but it was discussed, and yeah.
Shauna Ungerson. I'm also a Manor Lane resident, 2 houses off of Siwanoy. What I'm not hearing and what I'd like to hear is, I see projected work beginning. When will work be ending? And what is the rollout for that? Because I'm just wondering how disruptive this will be to, it's not probably everyone's kids' lives. Not to mention, I live next to the school, so it'll be disruptive to me anyway, but I'm trying to reconcile in my head that this will ultimately be great for my children, but the years of disruption, what will that be like? And so I'm interested in knowing, work starts July 2026, when does work end?
Really good question. So the short answer is depends on what we're doing. Building an addition the size of option B, let's say, it's going to require at least 2 summer construction seasons. So what we typically see is something like that would start in the spring, go through 2 construction seasons and open September. So like a 16-month, 18-month cycle for the new addition. And when we're talking about additions and renovations, so option B includes renovating the existing building as well. So, making the building not like new, restoring it, fixing some of the things that are aged. So there's probably a phased interior renovation associated with that, which would typically, and we haven't worked out any logistics, build an addition, occupy the addition, then start renovating the spaces that you can move out of. So that's probably happening in 2 phases over the summers. And then probably the following school year after the addition opens. So I think what I'm telling you is order of magnitude is probably 2 to 3 years to do all that type of work for option B. Part of the exercise of the construction manager is to help us work through some of the logistics of how these projects could happen. So hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll have a little bit more insight into the specifics of kind of potential timing.
And part of the logistics element includes that the playground area will be shut down for a period of time, and children might be displaced for a period of time. Like, they cannot be at Siwanoy attending school.
No, they will be at
They will be
Siwanoy.
there.
Yeah, they're
Okay.
not. There's
So
no.
There's no trailers.
There's no
okay.
and I think that was another
Okay.
confusing takeaway that some folks had. If we were building a brand new school, that was the only context in which we talked about needing trailers. So the students would remain in school through this construction, correct me if I'm wrong, Walter, this construction can be done during the school year.
Okay.
Same way at Prospect, we had the expansion done, and we put safety protocols in place. There's really strict, parameters around that. But the internal renovations cannot be done while students are in those spaces. So that's where we often would be mostly summer work for the renovations, and that would be build this first, and then maybe relocate some folks in there, and then, renovate the other spaces as able. So yeah, there will not be trailers. We won't be moving students to other buildings.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Great questions.
Hi, Gretchen Koback, Purcell, Manor Lane resident. And curious, I just would like to also just let it be known, I'm all for preserving the existing buildings. I wasn't at the last meeting, but just so my point of view is also logged. But just a curiosity, there's so little outdoor space. We talk about the Colonial kids having to march over to Franklin Field. We all know the limited amount of space at Hutch. And now the only school that seems to have it, or the only two schools in the elementary category, are Prospect and Siwanoy. You see kids coming with their basketballs playing all the time. It's a leveraged outdoor space. That's going to go away, and it's going to have a driveway instead or other things. I just feel like we keep encroaching upon what is the benefit and the value of outdoor space for kids is equally as important as having a nice new cafeteria. So I'm just trying to understand kind of the trade-offs versus, and then the other piece from an ADA compliance, is it required? Are we grandfathered into is it 1991 grandfathering?
I think it's not a complete black and white answer, but if we're
Yeah.
going to do any work at this scale, we're going to.
Well, that's if you do work, but if you choose not to do work, you don't have to be ADA compliant, right? That's kind of how we are where we are
This is much
today.
more technical than I'm.
Sorry, I just want to understand that
Yeah.
because I just want the group to also understand that I don't think we're required to have ADA compliance unless we start making modifications.
So ADA compliance is a little bit of an outlier within building design and regulations. So grandfathering is something that is within the building code. So provided your building meets the code at the time it was constructed, you're quote-unquote grandfathered. So you're not required to go out and meet the new building code.
Right.
ADA is a little different. That's legislation. So it's not building code. The building code does require compliance with ADA, but the requirement and implementation of ADA is a legislative requirement. And if it's not done, there are certain liabilities associated with that. So grandfathering doesn't really apply to ADA. There are some very extenuating circumstances where there can be some relief, but I don't think this building is going to qualify for any of that relief. So
If we touch it.
doesn't have to do with whether or not you touch
But
it.
meaning we're currently then not in compliance?
Correct.
And what happens as a result of not being in compliance?
It's a good question. There isn't necessarily an ADA police person that's going to come through.
Right.
But in the event that someone is not offered the opportunity to do certain things within your building, you have some very specific liability associated with that.
I mean, I know, I'm just saying.
Yeah, and I would just add,
I've lived through
there's-
it with
yeah,
like kids
there's-
with broken legs and
And I was
also,
going to say
I
that there are
understand.
practical implications,
I
yeah, for the
understand.
folks in
I'm
the
just
building.
making the point because I think everybody should just understand what's required versus a nice to have. And I think to date, kids who have a need to the point that 3 other schools are ADA compliant and there are options. So and I work in HR, so I understand like the need for that. So it's not that I'm trying to, I just want everybody to understand what's required versus
I'm just gonna
ideal.
say, it's not a building code related issue.
Yeah.
This is not a building code related
Yeah.
issue. It's like it's a legal issue. So you're required by law to comply with it. The enforcement is not done by a building code person necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit, the requirement component is a little bit out of my expertise, other than I know the building code requires you to do it and the law requires you to do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's ADA is really not something that can be grandfathered, so to speak.
And then back to the question of dimensions, I would be curious to know how much outdoor space is left over when all this is done, and I think that's.
Yeah, we've had that request, that came up at the last board
Okay.
meeting. We are going to work on a quantitative analysis of what the site proposes. Obviously, there's more building footprint associated with this. And we want to maximize the use of the outdoor space, also being sensitive to the idea of pervious versus impervious surface. So trying to keep it soft and sensitive, but also highly usable. So there's a balancing act there of how we want to do that. So we're going to bring some numbers next time this is updated, and we can talk about it. And we're learning a lot, right? We're getting a lot of really good feedback about how the outdoor space behind the building is used, not only during school day, but for the community. And we're going to respond to that as best we can with the design concepts.
Bike riding, basketball. It's one of the few playgrounds that the kids have in the community to be able to use.
Yeah, and to the superintendent's point, these drawings have not been updated since we heard the last round of feedback. And we did hear very, very clearly that the driveway is not exciting anybody. So we're going to find an alternative solution there.
You know, if I could just actually ask one question on that front, if you don't mind, because I was over here with Mr. Johnson the other day, and this is currently all asphalt. So I guess what I'm not fully understanding, if you could help me understand it, is what is different about the road? It would be a drive for a delivery van to get in with food. It's all asphalt right up to the fence line.
Kids can play basketball.
Right.
Yeah, kids are utilizing that entire space right now as an outdoor playground. And because it's blacktop or asphalt, it's being utilized where they learn to ride bikes, it's where they play basketball, it's where they're on their scooters, it's where people congregate from other areas of town because it's available as a safe space for that. And so when you start putting the cafeteria there and then green space, so I think the issue, and I don't want to speak on behalf of anybody else, but if that's a driveway, then you're inviting cars to drive there. But if it's a walkway, a pedestrian walkway, it's just a walkway. It's not really usable for anything from a playground perspective or for recreation purposes. Whereas that whole space today is recreation
Okay.
and utilized to its fullest extent. You can go there on a weekend,
Yeah.
but during a weekday, it is fully utilized.
So I'm wondering if it's actually maybe a matter of semantics and just visuals, because I can envision this being a service path in for the truck to get in with food service and take the garbage out that is also flush with play space next to it. If it was, I mean, we'd have to talk through it, but I think our goal was to try to make it more green and soft and bring some picnic area back, but I'm actually hearing that's not what folks are wanting.
The current garbage.
If you, would you mind going to the mic?
is in-
Yeah, the current garbage collection is in
Is
front.
in front, right, and yeah, it's kind of a thin space there, but if for somehow you could somehow have a golf cart, maybe deliver from the front and access it with the existing, part of the existing driveway in the front, it might make sense.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. We're just trying to really, really understand what the concern is so we can solve for
Is
it.
the plan to move the garbage to the back?
We hadn't gotten to that level of detail, but
Because you're saying that if the driveway's there to pick up the
yeah,
garbage.
that would have been, for delivery of food for sure, it would make sense to have the garbage cans near the cafeteria. But again, we haven't gotten to that
So, I mean,
real
there is a
granular
circular
level.
driveway in the front.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm just saying, because we already have the circular driveway in the front, if there's a way to just keep utilizing that as is. And even in one of the plans in option B minus, there is no cafeteria, and therefore then there would
Correct.
be no driveway, is that right?
The kids still have to eat, so the food would still have to come in.
It
But
could come
they
in
would
through-
continue to eat in the gymnasium.
So it could continue to come in through the front in that case?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right.
Hey, Steve Chicane. I live in the Prospect area. I guess this wasn't on my notes, but ADA compliance is not a nice to have. Okay, I wouldn't want to be the person telling a family or a child that they can't go to their neighborhood school because we didn't do a project for them. All right, this is not about broken legs. All right, so I can't believe what I just heard. So I have comments, not questions. So my opinion is that this district really needs to refurbish or rebuild or whatever you want to do 4 of the 6 schools here, right? So the Hutchinson is new, middle school doesn't need a ton of work, but the reality is, and you might not want to hear it, but this building is not modern, right? The high school is depressing. I come here for parent-teacher conferences, it's rooms are tiny, it's dark, it's depressing. Your projects really only address very little of this building, right? You've identified that Siwanoy needs a lot of work. I think as Ms. Quinton said, Colonial is going to need a lot of work, right? And Prospect's not being touched, and that's also 100 years old, right? So I fully agree that we live in an upper-class town, and these buildings don't reflect kind of our demographic, right? So I think if you're going to do stuff, you got to go all in, all right? Don't half-ass this stuff, right? But to that end, I have big problems with kind of the size and scope of what you're proposing here. So, you mentioned that, tax neutrality and bonds coming off. I think, there's a little smoke and mirrors there. So for a number of years, the board and the administration has said, we're going to wait until 2030 to do the next big round of financing, because as you showed, there's 55 million of capacity that you could do at that point in time, right? And plus 10 million in 2 years. However, when I add up all the numbers you showed, it's 150 to 181 million dollars. Okay, that's more than 65 million, right? So that's going to be an immediate tax hit to everyone in this community, and that's only phase one, or let's say phase two. Hutchinson was number one. Phase two of what's going to still to come, right? So 180 million bucks. For what I would argue is many of these things are Band-Aids on old buildings that may eventually have to get replaced in 20 or 30 years. And to date, we have not seen any analysis in terms of, okay, what would be the cost of, and this might be extreme, tearing down the building and rebuilding it? Because I've got to imagine that operating a brand new building, and you have the data from Hutchinson, I assume, operating a brand new building has got to be cheaper than keeping on investing in these old buildings over time.
Can I address a couple things?
Sure.
Only because I don't want to forget them by the time
Yep.
we get to the rest of
And
the
I
comments.
have
I know
other
you got
stuff.
a list. So, couple things. We did not put a whole roll-up of what this would cost because the board is still considering
Mm-hmm.
what of this, which level of options, is everything in, is it prioritized? So I didn't want to get ahead of them in their decision-making by putting some number in. You're exactly right. If you add up the highest of everything you saw, you're talking some very large numbers. But the board has not decided what level of, what total cost of bond they're putting forward. So I want to be clear about that. That's not decided yet. Certainly there's a major scope of potential projects. Also, as far as the implementation of them, we, as I said earlier, and I know that you know this stuff because I know you study this, you study all of our moves, but you study you're in finance too. We would stage out the projects and the borrowing to go with them in a way to try to minimize the tax impact by trying to keyhole into those drops in borrowing to the greatest degree possible. So we would stage the projects out over time, so stage the borrowing out over time, so the tax impact of whatever that final number is not going to hit all at once. I think that was the point I wanted to make. Because we're not going to go out.
But how isn't
and
it going to hit?
borrow.
I understood it's not going to hit all at once, but it's going to hit in the next 5
Eventually.
years.
Yeah, and what we talked about
And my
back
point
in
is that-
17, 18 is gradually stepping up to that level so
Right.
there wasn't a massive increase to the
Right,
community.
but the
you know,
amount
year.
rolling off is 65, and what you've proposed
Is
is,
about
again,
that.
150 to 180, and what I view as these things have to occur, and then some, right? So we're probably looking at $300 million over the next, it's real.
We're not looking at 3 million.
No, not now, but over the next 15
Yeah.
years, 20 years. And I think, and this is deja vu to the Hutchinson process, but this board and administration lacks a 20 to 25-year plan to kind of spell out this is what needs to be fixed and how we're going to time it and how we're going to pay for it. And I think I've been here long enough to know that there's been generations of mistakes made in this district of people boards not wanting to borrow and not wanting to spend, and now we're paying for it, right? So when you have AC systems and everything that haven't been upgraded, other districts have done serial bond issuance so that you could borrow every 5 or 10 years and keep everything up to date. This district never did that, right? It always seems to be an emergency that we start spending a ridiculous amount of money. And that's what we're facing. I wouldn't call these emergencies, but you're dropping big numbers on us, and there's going to be more to come,
Yeah.
right? And finally, just to quantify kind of the tax impact, right? So I don't think you've revealed that, but let's say it's $100 million of debt, right? It's not 150 something, but it's 100 million, okay? Edgemont just did a bond, or just approved a bond, and they said their cost of debt is 3.6%, okay? So 100 million would be 3.6 million of annual interest, and then let's say it's 30 years amortization, that's another, let's say 3.5 million, 3.3 million of amort, right? You get building aid for, let's say, half of that. So that's about 5.25 million a year of extra debt service. That's extra taxes we have to pay on top of the existing levy. Existing levy is $72 million, right? So an extra 5.25 million is about 7.25% on top of what we're paying. That's a lot of money. And on top of that, we haven't been hit with the Hutch debt yet, right? You've been using the debt service reserve to smooth that out. At some point, that runs out, and then we're going to see another increase. So we're already paying ridiculous taxes. People in Village of Pelham are about to, pay more taxes for their borrowing, right? And then you want to add like 10% on top of the 2.5% to 3% regular, increases that we see. It's a lot of money. I see a lack of a plan. There's no reason, people probably don't know this, no reason for this to go to vote in May. You could do a referendum anytime you want, right? I know you want to get the work started, but I think more planning has to be done to make this, feasible for everyone in the community. Those are my comments.
So just one thing I would add to that, every district's got a unique circumstance, and I know you know that. One of the things that we are waiting to do is get a little further down the road on decisions of what we want to include in here so that we can get a more accurate tax impact to all of your questions. Because at the end of the day, we recognize that it is a significant impact on the community. We don't want to be going out with something that is not in the ballpark of accurate. So that's why we haven't done that yet from our perspective. And I think, the challenge, and I feel compelled to defend at least a little bit of past boards. That balance has always been the challenge. There's always going to be $200 and $300 million worth of work we could do, but everyone is sensitive to the taxpayer. So where things weren't done in the past, those were difficult decisions that were made then. I'm sure this board is going to face difficult decisions now because of the financial burden that's already heavy on the community. So that's why we're trying to at least be thoughtful and intentional about prioritizing. We can't do it all. We know that we can't.
Right, that's my point about a long-term plan.
Well, and
Long-term plan, it's a lot of money. It wasn't recent boards, I'm talking about 30, 40 years ago, they should have been thinking ahead. And that's what this board should be doing, 20 or 30 years.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We've got about 5 minutes left. Is any last questions? Great.
Hi, Karen Albright. I have a daughter who went to middle school and high school here. I grew up here, Prospect Hill, straight through. And I just wanted, because this is partly for feedback, I wanted to give my feedback that I love these beautiful old buildings. I did not find the high school depressing at all when I went here, other than, being in high school can be depressing. But
Your normal high school angst.
Yeah, exactly. But Siwanoy Place. And I love the Siwanoy building. It's gorgeous, and if you knock it down, you don't get it back. And I loved growing up and going to these old, beautiful buildings. I felt the history in the halls. I felt the confidence of having all these people who came before us. You move to a storied town like this because of these beautiful old buildings, the tree-lined streets, the community. So that's my feedback.
Thank you.
Thanks. This follows on to a couple of things that have been said. The last meeting we had at Siwanoy, I thought we were giving feedback that was then going to be taken back. And tonight, it looks like that feedback has disappeared. I don't know what happened to Plan A. I think if you're going to involve the community, you should at least let some people who were not at that meeting but are at this meeting see what was originally on the table. And the other thing is, feedback that was given at that meeting had asked that the two wings not be labeled as new, because the connotation there is that they're expendable, when the newness, the delta between the original building and the wings in terms of vintage is negligible. So I would request the next time we see these slides for that to please be removed. Sounds like a small point, but to call them new lends the belief that, well, maybe we can do without them. I think they're just as integral to the character of this school and this neighborhood.
And I thought we had done that, so we'll double check. And even in our, Lisa might describe it, if I missed it, I apologize. I heard that loud and clear, and we've tried to take it out of our lexicon and, you know, and respect the building as a whole. The other thing I would say, you know, the board really was not interested in pursuing A any further because it didn't solve any of the problems other than the ADA. It didn't add classroom space, it didn't provide the cafeteria, it didn't, the original A that we looked at didn't have internal renovations. All it would have done was resolve the ADA issues. And if we're gonna do that level of work, the goal was to look comprehensively, which is why A was not back on the table. But what I will put out to you is B. Basically, A was this same thing without these two classrooms, it only had 2 classrooms at each level instead of 3. Correct. Yeah, there was no internal renovation. It didn't have a 3rd classroom at each level, and it didn't have a cafeteria.
So there's more work to do.
So I guess we might.
Definition of what is required versus what is a nice to have.
Yeah.
And I think for continuity's sake, let's have that, let's keep that going and meeting to meeting.
Yeah, and that's, I'm not gonna put them on the spot, but that's for the board to decide if we want to go back to A. I think our goal is, over the next couple of weeks, is to try to get to fewer options and hone in on what they want to move forward with. And not keep putting things onto the table, but try to get to a point of taking things off the table while hearing those concerns and doing the best to address it. So I think the information about the square footage, I think, is going to be really valuable. The questions about size on square footage will be helpful in envisioning what any of these might mean to the community. So, thanks. Okay. All right.
I just want
Last call.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to say that, yeah, I agree with most people here that it would be great to preserve the graciousness and beauty of the old building, and by adding on, if you need to, for the space in the back. And I can see different configurations might meet the needs by even possibly preserving some more playground space by making it 2 stories on the cafeteria side. But also, I was just wondering, kudos for the geothermal proposals, and was wondering about solar roofing on the new buildings and those that need new roofs.
So we have a facilities committee that's also doing this work. That question has come up there. We haven't gotten to that discussion yet as part of these, but as we continue with the facilities committee and these, and the feedback keeps coming up, that's something we'll explore. I think there's going to be some challenges around that, but we're going to certainly look at it and see what's an option. When we did this back in 2018, it wasn't really financially viable. It didn't have the payback that it would have been worth at the time. Plus, I think there's a lot to look at, but that is something that members of our committee have brought up that we're going to be looking at. Yeah. Okay. I think maybe with that, that's a great place for us to end. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We appreciate your feedback. And thank you to the board for being here. I think we got the entire board is here tonight, so they're hearing firsthand everything you shared. Thank you and have a great night.